So let's talk about a real historical puzzle. How did a place that was basically in a state of constant war end up being one of the most creative and influential civilizations ever? Well, today, we're diving into the incredible story of Mesopotamia.
All right, to really get this, we've got to start with the land itself. You know, in the ancient world, geography was basically destiny. And for Mesopotamia, well, it was a classic double-edged sword.
And this is where we hit our central puzzle. Think about ancient Egypt for a second. What comes to mind? Pyramids, pharaohs, right? A civilization that was incredibly stable for, 3,000 years. But then you look right next door, at Mesopotamia, and the story is the total opposite. Just constant chaos. So why? Why the massive difference?
Well, the first clue is actually in the name, Mesopotamia. It's Greek for the land between the rivers. And we're talking about the Tigris and the Euphrates. This place, which is mostly in modern-day Iraq, was this incredibly rich, fertile strip of land. It was basically a giant magnet for anyone and everyone looking to settle down and build a life.
Okay, so to crack this puzzle, let's put these two ancient superpowers, Egypt and Mesopotamia, right next to each other. The difference is just, it's night and day, and it all comes down to one thing: geography.
And this is it. This is the crucial difference. Egypt was practically a fortress. It was surrounded by these huge deserts and seas, making it super hard to attack. But Mesopotamia, it was the complete opposite. It was just wide-open plains, basically a giant welcome mat for any army that happened to be passing by. And that bit of geographical luck, or, lack of it, was going to decide everything.
Now you might be thinking, wait, didn't they have mountains? Shouldn't that help? But here's the thing, Mesopotamia's mountains were actually a huge disadvantage. They were low, which meant invaders could easily hide, gather their forces, and then, bam, launch these devastating surprise attacks. It was an absolute nightmare if you were trying to defend the place.
So because it was so vulnerable all the time, this created a relentless cycle of conquest. Seriously, one empire would rise up, get powerful, and then just get toppled by the next group. It was this dizzying pattern of invasion, collapse, and then rebirth.
Okay, look, you don't need to memorize all these names and dates. Just get the pattern. You've got the Sumerians, then the Akkadians, then the Babylonians, then the Hittites. It was just one after another. A new power sweeps in, takes over, and then, you guess it, gets conquered themselves. A true revolving door of empires.
And what's so fascinating is that each of these groups added their own layer to the culture. The Sumerians, they were the mysterious originals, the pioneers. The Akkadians came in and were the first to unify the whole place. Then the Babylonians, they gave the world its first major set of laws. And the Hittites, they showed up as this military powerhouse, bringing in game-changing tech like iron weapons and war chariots.
But here's the really incredible twist in the story. All of that chaos, all of that conflict, it didn't just lead to destruction. It actually fueled this explosion of creativity and innovation, stuff that, believe it or not, still shapes our world today.
Right in the middle of all this turmoil, the Babylonian king, a guy named Hammurabi, had a brilliant idea. He realized that to hold his super diverse empire together, he needed one single set of laws that applied to everyone. And the result? The Code of Hammurabi. I mean, we're talking about one of the most influential legal documents in all of history.
I'm sure we've all heard that phrase, right? An eye for an eye. Well, that's the famous principle right at the heart of Hammurabi's code. The punishment is supposed to fit the crime. But it sounds simple, but the reality was way more complicated than that. First off, that eye for an eye thing, it only applied if you were social equals. If a nobleman hurt a slave, he'd just have to pay a fine. But here's what's truly mind-blowing, especially for a document that's almost 3,800 years old. The code made a distinction between intentionally hurting someone and doing it by accident. Think about that. The whole idea of intent, that's a cornerstone of pretty much every single modern legal system on the planet.
And this wave of innovation wasn't just about law. I mean, their architecture was just staggering. They built these massive structures called ziggurats. Think of them as enormous stepped pyramids that were actually temples. They were like symbolic mountains, built to connect the earth with the heavens, a way to get closer to their gods.
And the sheer scale of these things had a huge cultural impact. In fact, a lot of historians are pretty convinced that the great ziggurat in the city of Babylon was the real-life inspiration for the famous biblical story of the Tower of Babel.
So that brings up a good question, right? If Mesopotamia was so influential, why isn't it as famous as ancient Egypt? I mean, why do we see pyramids on postcards and t-shirts, but not ziggurats?
Well, there's a perfect analogy for this. Think of the millefeuille, that layered French pastry. That's Mesopotamian history. Each new civilization that came in would literally build its cities right on top of the ruins of the old one. So you just get layer after layer after layer of buried history.
And for archaeologists, this is the key difference. In Egypt, the ruins were often preserved almost perfectly by the dry sand, left alone for thousands of years. But in Mesopotamia, the ruins were buried, they were built over, and they were often destroyed by the next wave of invaders. It just makes them incredibly hard to dig up and study.
I mean, get this. That huge stone tablet with Hammurabi's code on it, that foundational legal document we were talking about, it wasn't rediscovered until 1901. 1901. For thousands of years, one of the most important innovations in human history was just lost, buried under the dust.
So, when we put all the pieces of this story together, what's the big takeaway? What's the lasting lesson from this chaotic but absolutely brilliant civilization?
It's this. Stability isn't the only way to achieve greatness. Sometimes, the biggest, most profound innovations don't come from times of peace. They're forged in the fire of conflict, and the constant, messy clash of different cultures and ideas. And maybe that's the ultimate lesson of Mesopotamia, that sometimes chaos itself can be the very cradle of creativity.